All right, so today we're going to look at a really nice attacking game in the Queen's Gambit Declined exchange, using this plan with the knight g2 and then f3 e4, just sort of punching through in the center. I got to admit, it was a game I played, and so I feel pretty good about this. So let's go ahead and jump in here. As always, there'll be a link in the description uh, with a link to the game, with further analysis, my thoughts, and some additional lines. Something that those of you who are a bit more serious might find useful. Anyway, let's jump in and take a look. So I found myself in this position in this game, and here I have a pretty stunning knockout. When I had maneuvered into this position, I was looking at trying to make a sacrifice on h6 work, which here it just clearly does because h6, if he takes it, we go here, but it can get a bit messy. I was worried that after takes, maybe he'll just ignore it and I'll take here, and things are kind of a bit wild. And I'm probably still much better, but I didn't really want to go for this. And instead, I found a much more elegant solution that pretty well ends the game immediately. We just take, and he can't take the knight because we'll play queen f6, and then we'll just have this nice pin, and we're going to get a mate on the next move. So, for example, something like this is just made on the board immediately. Believe it or not, after we take, the best move is just to play queen to d8 when we can take, and go here. The game ended pretty similarly. He played f5 and then just hangs the knight and then resigns immediately. So let's back up and take a look at how we got here, because how do you get to an attacking position like this, which is something I've always sort of struggled with. I knew kind of what the ideas and the openings were, but for the longest time, I didn't really understand how to attack, and I still don't. Well, I'm getting better. As you can see, I reached this position. I did learn a lot from this, and I wanted to share with you guys what I learned. So a standard Queen's Gambit opening here, and we play the exchange, of course. Everything's just sort of happening naturally, and this is a line we've probably all seen a bunch of times if you're playing the Carocon course, or sorry, not the Carocon, the Queen's Gambit course. And now we get this sort of first hiccup, where Black is trying to exchange these bishops, and I guess just relieve the pressure on the center. This is a really common idea. These knight maneuvers, where they play knight to h7 to h5 or to e4, or sometimes this knight to to f8, and then this knight back. Really common stuff. So we just take, and they take with the queen, and it seems like they've already blunted our plan of trying to play f3 because that's not f3. This is f3 because there's significant pressure here. But there's an idea that I saw in some games that I was analyzing that still lets us go for this plan. I think it's kind of an important idea to remember if you want to play this setup. Now, we could totally switch gears, play rook b1, try to play b4, and go for this sort of traditional minority attack. But that's not why we put the knight on e2. We want to push. We want to play f3. And we want to play in the center. So we can play rook a e1, and the idea is simple. We're just going to move this knight and then play f3 and e4. Now, it's not necessarily we usually like the knight on d1 because it defends this pawn. But that's not really such a big deal now because that queen is usually still on d8, putting pressure on the pawn, and well, it's not now. So in a way, you can say we just kind of follow our rook to wherever their queen is. So knight f8 was played, and in this position, I've more typically seen the knight back to f6 is the most common thing that I've seen. It's not actually the most common move played. Turns out this knight f8 is the most common played. Against knight to f6, we have this cool move knight d1. And the point of knight d1 is we're supporting e3 again, and we're going to play f3, e4, and leave this knight here to defend this pawn. And it's nice to move this knight back because if e4 gets played, then we can play f3 with tempo, and the knight can't trade itself. So this was the idea I had in mind when they played knight f8, and well, I'm going to go ahead with my idea. There's actually a better way to sort of achieve the same plan, because we don't really necessarily want this knight on d1, and we can just play knight to c1. And the point is that we might be able to cycle this knight around to c3, but in either way, we don't really need the knight to defend. We can do perfectly well with just the rook, and we can play f3 and go for e4 this way. So something like bishop d7, f3, this comes across, we can bring the queen here, and we have a pretty comfortable looking position. And we're definitely going to try to get this play. Maybe we'll cycle this knight back around. Now, you wonder, like, why c1? Instead of, say, g3. G3 seems pretty natural. It comes with tempo too, right? Well, then the knight can just trade itself. And like, generally, if I'm going to try to attack, I want to try to keep some pieces on the board. So knight to d1. and he drops back, and now f3, bishop e6, and I went for e4 immediately. So when you're trying to gauge if e4 is possible, the two things that I always tend to look for is, do I need to be worried about knight g4, and do I need to be worried about c5? And I decided in this case, I didn't really need to be worried about either one. So after e4 and takes, knight g4 is not an issue because this knight on d1 is actually doing good work and preventing this. And we can kind of ignore it, or maybe just play h3 and kick it back out. C5 is more testing, but I intended to meet c5 with d5, and we do get a bit of a hole on e5 here, but we have a passed pawn as well. So this is pretty double-edged, but I still like white's chances. I mean, of course, we could maybe just try to take the pawn, but we're probably not going to get to hold it. But c5 was not was played. Instead, bishop to g4 happened. And here I went ahead and smashed through with e5. Now, I could have strongly considered playing knight to e3 first. Idea being that after, well, one, we're hitting the bishop, so the bishop needs to do something. Well, let's just look at it. So if e3, then say bishop takes, because otherwise if the bishop just drops back, now we can play here, and it's a lot less appetizing to play knight d5, because we can just capture it, and this pawn would act as an umbrella against any pressure that was ever going to happen against our d4 pawn. So something like takes, we can take, say the rook comes across, and now we can play e5 with tempo. And since this guy is a bit soft, and then we get here to f5, the queen comes out of the way, we can come out to g4, and we're already kind of just starting to see a similar attacking position to what we had later in the game. And this would be quite a nice way to go. What I played is equally strong, apparently, to play this immediate e5, although I didn't quite follow it up as nice as I should have. So after knight to d5, I was worried about this, because I didn't want to give up this bishop. I thought if I have to trade this bishop, I only want to do it for this one. But this is a mistake. I played a3 to prevent that, which is often a typical idea. Sometimes black develops their knight out to a6 and they make this threat. But this is just a bit slow. We can actually just allow this to happen. So instead of knight d5, we can just continue on with our plan. So say, for example, knight to g3, intending to try to get to f5, bring this guy to e3. One, just defending the e3 square at all, because this was a square that's under a bit of tenderness. Knight to b4, takes. And again, you're going to see a common idea. We're playing knight to e3. We're going to put a knight on f5. And we put the knight on e6. We bring this knight in, and we're already prepared to bring this rook up, again, with a similar attacking position. Note that the knight on e5 is really the kind of the crux of this. Knight on e5 plus lifting a rook, really, really strong ideas. And most of the analysis you're seeing here, I'm achieving this kind of attacking position sooner than I actually did in the game, which is kind of the key point. Because when we were getting to this point, my sort of general assessment was that I needed to be attacking this f7 square, because it seems like, okay, I've got this open file. I've got the chance to put a bishop here. I can go put a knight on e6. I can double on the f file. It just seemed like all of my pieces were primed for attacking this f7. And that's really just not the way things are. Because as primed as we are for attacking f7, black is equally primed for defending f7. So bishop h5, I brought my knight in, he trades, and I was actually pretty happy with the decision I made here. I'm not really one to sack material, even just a measly pawn on the side of the board. But here I did correctly decide that I should take with this pawn. And my thinking was that I'm never really going to have to worry about d4 again. And yes, you can go grab this, but that's going to be a lot of tempi. So for example, if you were to actually go ahead and grab this, I can play knight to e3. And you really need to bring the queen back, because the queen needs to come back to help guard over here. And we get knight f5. And then after queen d7, we have way more than enough compensation. This extra pawn is so far back. We have threats coming here. We're going to lift our rooks. We can bring the queen to this square, attack on e7, h6, and we really have tremendous compensation for the pawn. There is just no doubt that we're doing really great here. I definitely underestimated, because honestly, when I was looking at this position in my head, I was planning to go put the knight on d6. It just looks like such a nice square, and I valued it so much more than the knight on f5, which turns out to be pretty erroneous. Again, because I was really focused on this f7 square and didn't think that there's plenty of other squares to attack here. So anyway, I did allow this option, and he wisely chose not to do it. And now we captured here. And this is the best move, but not for the reason I thought. Knight takes g6, and I played queen to b3, and my plan is simple. And I actually got to execute my whole plan, but then you're going to see it doesn't actually get me anywhere. What I missed is that instead of queen to b3, e6 is just crushing. Absolutely crushing. There is the only way to not lose the knight or better is to play f5, which just drops a clean pawn, and you're probably going to lose the knight anyway. And then we can just march these guys down the board. This is like a game over tactic immediately. Totally off my radar. Didn't consider e6 at all. I was super focused on my idea. f7 was like the only square I had in mind, and it didn't even consider attacking it with my pawn. Really nice trick to keep in mind. So I played queen to b3, defends this guy, and continues on with what I want to do. I have a clear plan. Knight f8, just continuing on with what I want. And I've got everything I could hope for. Everything. But it's also nothing. Like I did everything I was dreaming of, and I have zero pressure on the position. None whatsoever. So queen b6 was played, and now I have I think to myself, all right, so now what? I did literally everything that I wanted to do, and it didn't get me anywhere. So now what? So I decided that I needed to reroute my queen over to this side of the board, because my queen's not really doing anything. This knight is just totally shutting my queen out, and if I can get my queen back over to the other side of the board, maybe I can do something. So I chose to play queen to b2. I liked this square because I thought c5 was going to happen, and I wanted to transfer the queen to g3, and I thought that it was a nice idea to keep kind of touch with this d4 pawn along the way, just so I didn't really have to worry about it. So here, I played queen to f2, and I considered playing d5 here, thought that was a little bit too loosening. It's actually pretty unnecessary. I don't really need to do that. So he played knight to here, forcing me to put my rook on the square I want, because again, f7, I have no prospect. Even with my queen, even with now my queen not being blocked, I still don't really have any serious prospect to attack this pawn. So he checks my rook, we come across, kick it right back out. And notice that a lot of those attacking positions we were looking at earlier with this pawn, the knight on f5, again, I was definitely thinking about a sacrifice here. I just needed to decide, do I want to play queen e3 first, or do I want to go ahead and take immediately? So he brings the rook across, and we're back into the position that we were just looking at earlier in the game, earlier in the video. And yeah, we can see I get to crash through. We'll look at this beautiful tactic one more time. So proud of myself. Just a really nice win. And I think that hopefully this is an instructive point for you guys. This construction of putting the knight on f5 in conjunction with this pawn on e5, and then just lifting a rook and being able to kick anything that comes out. If you imagine that there was a knight sitting on this g6 square, instead, we definitely could play h4, h5. We doubled the rook, put it on this square. This h6 pawn really makes it hard for him to play g6 at any point. F6 super weak. And these pieces are really just kind of shut out. They're all defending f7, which is the square I wanted to attack. But none of them can help at all with g7 or h6. So yeah, this was definitely a fun one to play, and I think that I really kind of learned a lot. And in the future, I'm probably going to think differently about how I'm attacking in these positions, and I'm maybe going to give up on this being so fixated with the f7 square. But as always, I thank you guys for your time. Leave me a comment. I really love comments. Subscribe. Do whatever you got to do, man. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.